Yeah. Great way to start. Good evening, everybody. I'm Rebecca Mitchell, and on behalf of the Stratham Heritage Commission, I'm really happy to welcome you here tonight for our Commission's 2017 program. As you are, I am sure, aware, last year Stratham celebrated its 300th anniversary of the official establishment of our town. Since the founding of a meeting house was a requirement for the legal establishment of a township, 2016 was also the 300th anniversary of the congregation known today as the Stratham Community Church. So 300 years ago, we had in place two pillars of the community: life, local government, and a church. Several months ago, however, it occurred to me that we really hadn't, as we were doing our celebrations, we really hadn't properly recognized another institution that was vitally important to our town in its colonial era: inns and taverns. All right, I will have a few more remarks, and then Ron Deane is going to come up here and talk about the remarkable work he's doing at the Kenniston Tavern. Marcia Schmidt Blaine, who is our guest speaker tonight, will talk about tavern history and culture and her research that was especially focused on women tavern keepers. Then I will close with some words about more modern times. So, between 1784 and 1792, Jeremy Belknap wrote his 3-volume history of New Hampshire. It's hard to believe that in the 18th century, somebody could write a 3-volume history of New Hampshire, but this guy was comprehensive. When Belknap wrote of the qualities of an ideal New Hampshire town, he could have been describing Stratham. Quote, "Were I to form a picture of a happy society, it would be a town consisting of a due mixture of hills, valleys, and streams of water. The land well fenced and cultivated. The inhabitants mostly husbandmen. Their wives and daughters domestic manufacturers." He goes on, but for our purposes tonight, it is important to note that right in the middle of this list of requirements of an ideal community, he stipulates the necessity of a, quote, "a decent inn for the refreshments of travelers and for public entertainments." So he was very specific that an inn or tavern was an integral part of life in a healthy community. What you've all been sitting here looking at is actually a print of an 18th century English inn, but it bears likely a pretty close resemblance to what a New England tavern would have been in the same era, with a small bar. I don't know whether we'd have that nattily dressed soldier there, but a few other local characters, bottles, platters, or plates, and animals. And it's not that different from a kitchen scene in anybody's house at that time. It's a very domestic kind of setting. But I want to digress a little bit, too, about words, terminology. I'm far from an expert on this, and probably Marcia may have more to say, but you will find that in this early period, the same place might be called a variety of names: inn, tavern, public house, ordinary, and even strong water house, which is kind of my favorite. But I will use the single word tavern, partly because if you say inn, people now think of some place where people go to spend the night. So tavern kind of is more descriptive of what we're talking about. So Stratham in the 18th and early 19th centuries was ideally suited for taverns. The road between Exeter and Portsmouth was one of the finest in the state, which might not have been saying much, but and very well traveled, enough to support several Greenland and Stratham taverns along its full length. In addition, the Stratham ferry over there on the Squamscott, and later the bridge crossing the Squamscott, was heavily used by those journeying to and from the interior towns. Similarly, traffic to and from the seacoast passed along Winnacott or Winnaconic Road, passing through the area of mills along the Winnacott River. One source lists 16 people from Stratham applying for tavern licenses between 1716 and 1765. The first tavern keeper in Stratham may have been what was called One-Armed Ben Levitt. I don't know what the story is, how he lost his other arm, but maybe somebody here has heard that story. He was called that by Richard Scammon. His 1899 article in the Granite Monthly is a prime source for Stratham history. Levitt appears to have received a tavern license in 1716. It was fairly common for people applying for licenses to run a tavern. They did it because they had some impairment that rendered them unfit for more strenuous occupations. So, for instance, in 1721, Jonathan Chase was granted a license because the selectmen said his house was conveniently located for the town, and he was also disabled and had no other means of providing for his family. That was also the case in 1748 when his son Thomas Chase applied for a license stating he was bodily infirm. Scammon also reported there was a tavern at Winnicott Mills at what we know as the Jewel Peabody Farm at 173 Winnicott Road. According to provincial papers in 1745, David Jervil was granted a license living at, quote, Winnicott, where there was a sawmill, a gristmill, and a fulling mill. Some of these taverns may have been fairly temporary, but for instance, while Jonathan Wigan had a license for a tavern there in 1721, somewhere along the line somebody else applied for a temporary license to operate in the same house. So it could have been that Jonathan Wigan was, we don't know the whole story, maybe he was otherwise occupied and somebody stepped in. Furthermore, between 1716 and 1765, there were 3 Stratham women who applied for tavern licenses. Widow Hannah Wigan in 1749, Love Chase in 1760, and Sarah Boynton in 1760 also. She was keeping a tavern before that time because an ad for an auction of her late husband's blacksmithing tools names her as an inn holder. Taverns in towns such as Stratham would have been almost indistinguishable from any other houses in town. The interiors would have been quite simply furnished. This is a kind of a recreation, but it gives you an idea of the simple, unfinished tavern tables, a little bar in the corner, a few things around, but pretty sketchy, nothing, no fancy tablecloths, not much else going on. Perhaps the most popular drink was the flip. And I'm not going to go into all the recipes for flip, but it was pretty strong. And I think we should be grateful that nowadays we're not having to pay for the selectmen's flips that they consumed notoriously at Chase's Tavern when they met there. Punch, usually a rum-based drink, was also very popular. The common practice was to serve a small punch bowl, usually about 8 to 9 inches, for a person or a table to share, and the men would pass the bowl around rather than ladling out into cute little cups the way we do today. This punch bowl, now at the New Hampshire Historical Society, is about 9 inches in diameter. It belonged to Payne Wingate here in Stratham. This is a rather fancy Chinese export variation of a punch bowl, so slightly more fancy than would have been served in a tavern. So tonight we're going to focus particularly on 2 Stratham taverns that were unquestionably the most well-known, most frequented in town. And both of them, remarkably, are still standing today. So, and those are Chase's Tavern, I mentioned some of the Chase family earlier, and also Kenniston's Tavern. Before I introduce Ron Deane to talk about his work at Kenniston's Tavern, I'll give you a little bit of its early history. This house, which is shown here in a 1943 Rumford Press calendar, Scenes of New Hampshire, Land of Scenic Splendor, was built in 1761 on 8 acres of land that Ephraim Crockett sold to his son John. His farmlands are down up where Jason Lane is and all that sort of stuff. And the Kenniston Tavern, as you know, is faces Portsmouth Avenue at the corner of Depot Road. Following year, 1762, John married Mary Lane, the firstborn of Samuel Lane and his wife, Mary. While John and Mary Crockett increased their holdings to 20 acres by 1777. They had 6 children, and they were finding it difficult to feed and support 6 children on only 20 acres of land. So they moved to Northwood, where they could farm more broadly than seemed to be possible here in Stratham. A few years after the Crockett's left town, the house was bought by Henry Kenniston, a tailor. And although the first legal record of Kenniston operating at a tavern, it was his license that was issued in 1803, the 1793 Phineas Merrill map locates Kennisons Inn. And that's how it looks today. And that its appearance today is due to the efforts of Ron Deane, who will be coming up here to talk about what he's been doing there. Ron Deane is a Stratham antique dealer, art dealer, who operates his business, Dart Antiques, in his barn at the old Chase Dairy Farm on Chase Lane. Ron will tell you about his acquisition of the Kenniston Tavern and his ongoing work preserving its historical features while also making it suitable for modern living. Ron has a whole evening's worth of slides, but he kindly consented to show this much shortened selection tonight, and we hope we can bring him back so that those of us who are interested in all the nitty-gritty can see everything that was going on there. Ron, will you come forward?
This is the oldest picture that I found of the inn, Tavern. The funny thing is, it looks like they're pointing to this building, but the inn is actually right here. That was a different time. That was before the road was paved. It was paved right here in about 1929. So I like to think this picture is about 1917. So it's 100 years old. This is another postcard. The main reason for this is to show you the door that is no longer there. When I bought the place, it had a window up at the top. I have no idea what it was for. People could make up their own ideas. And this shows the sign. This was as I got it. You maybe remember the newspaper and the situation, everything. My wife told me to finish the one we were in before we went looking for another one. And so we were working on that. One day I got curious after having looked at the place, what the price was at. And I found out that it was at a price. I just wrote a check and bought it because it was not going to go away. Not going to last long at that rate. Next. I don't know what it is about New England, but people love to pile their dirt up against the house and up against the foundation. I've had 2 places like this. So the first thing I did was started cutting it down about a foot. This shows out in the field, but it was actually up there. And I mean, it was up to this level, so you could see the main support was underground. And no matter which you put there, water gets through eventually. So that was the first project. And I know this is not true to form, not exactly historically accurate, but this was all just field stone in here, and I wanted to keep the rodents out. So I got some more granite to finish and did that all the way around the edge so that I could keep the critters out. This is the famous bifold door in the front. I was working on the back of it today. I found out that today, looking at it, that it used to open on the right, now it opens on the left. Whoever uses front doors on buildings anymore, always come to the kitchen or something. Next. Obviously, it needed insulation, so that came to the point. This part right here, somewhere right about in here on up, was the only original clapboard that was left. And I left it there, I didn't take it off. All of the other stuff was like number 4 pine or something, and it was curling and full of knots, so it was horrible. So I hope nobody panicked when I started ripping that off.
Who tries to come on?
This is a shot of the end. I snuck in a couple of new windows. The way I'm looking at this, all the things I'm doing on this place, I'm doing for the last time. Okay, so I got a lead drip edge over the corner of the stone. I got ice and water shield, and then over this one, black paper. You can see my marks here where the studs were, trying to get nails to go into things. And suddenly it's finished. Well, look at that. Hey, slide in it, and I tell you. Here you can see the part that was saved.
Yeah.
I replaced it with Vermont hemlock. And I did about 5 nails and realized I was going to have to drill a hole for every nail. So that's what I did. You wonder why it took me so long? Okay. But that's the last piece. See, those old trucks come in handy.
Could I ask a question?
No.
Why were the windows 6 followed by 8 on top?
I have no idea.
But you did copy that back.
They were the window. Those are the windows. Those are the windows that were there. Yeah,
Yeah.
I just did with that.
What style of house do you know?
Do you know?
George.
Revived?
Georgian probably.
Georgian, it was built in 1761.
If it wasn't for this young lady, I would be a year behind. And if she hadn't decided to go to college and be a Mormon missionary in Brazil, I would probably be finished. But she is amazing. I'm sure many of you have gone by there and seen her out there working. She does everything and she loves it. This is the threshold that was there. I don't know if it was original, but she was putting it in place. And some of you driving by might have seen my survey. I had a number of people comment, okay, which color should it be, you know? And you can see what it wound up.
Interestingly enough, many of these houses remained unpainted for many, many decades. So,
Yeah, getting down to the original color was hard to tell because the stuff had been removed. There's some of the trim was original. That's the old kitchen and the new kitchen. I don't know what else there is to say. This is the upstairs. Now, this is the dance room, or master bedroom. This is as it was when I got it. All this beautiful baseboard heating. Wallpaper. The guy that occupied that room for 25 years was a chain smoker. Oh. I understand he had one in one hand and one started in the other. So I'll show you a picture of what that resulted in. Not him, but... you can see the ceiling, this door. If anybody here borrowed that during the sold, I'd like it back. That's a hard one to replace, but somebody apparently walked off with it. So that's before anything had really started happening in there. And this is the ceiling, or the roof of that ceiling of that room. You can see the arched angle. And the thing that got me, I was wondering, said, okay, now did they build that room originally like that, or is this a salvaged beam? It's probably salvaged, because I'm thinking, gee, if they built that as a standard ceiling, and then in the late 1700s they remodeled the house and raised the ceiling, I don't know. But this does have notches in it, so it was probably salvaged from another structure. This is nicotine. Oh. And you can see there's a lot of nice detail, but this shows, this here, I've counted 13 layers of paint. That was in the kitchen. This is up in the other, the ballroom hallway around the doors. I think it had 9 or 10 layers. Great fun. This is the living room. As they got it, started taking down the stuff that people put up over the years.